Now Biv DeVoe, act like you know. We came to party, get on the floor. Girl, it's the weekend, go ahead and move.
Above the rim, above the rim. Take button in their car.
Girl, you know you the one, hit delete though. Should be done, finito.
Let you down.
It's just a matter of actions, girl. Something in your eyes, so deep. No one even knows it, girl. To me, you just can't show it. You know that I won't buy it.
Off with him, for real. He don't get it, never will. Stick a fork in him.
Touch me all over. Girl, what makes you
I can give you that word. Over here, baby, get that word. No need for the lie.
People come, people go. In this girl, you see that I apologize.
Most people think Biv DeVoe was just a lucky spin-off. You know, those leftover members from New Edition who accidentally stumbled into one hit and wrote it until it faded. But what if that version of the story is completely wrong? What if BBD wasn't some fluke but a survival move? A rebellion? A reinvention that changed the course of R&B forever? Because the truth is, behind the flashy suits and smooth dance moves was a group fighting to stay in the game. They weren't supposed to win. They weren't even supposed to exist. But somehow, they didn't just survive the fall of New Edition. They created a whole new sound, launched an entire movement, and decades later are still proving the industry wrong. So how did three guys who were never meant to lead become legends in their own right? What really happened behind the scenes? And why did the music industry turn its back on them when they needed it most? This isn't just a story about music, it's a story about survival. Let's rewind to the moment everything changed. By the late 80s, New Edition was falling apart at the seams. Bobby Brown had already been kicked out for being too wild. Ralph Tresvant was eyeing a solo career. And Johnny Gill, newly added to the mix, was changing the group's entire sound. Behind the scenes, egos were clashing. The label was scrambling, and no one really knew what the future held. And then, enter Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. These were the same producers who had just flipped Janet Jackson into a full-blown icon. And now, they had an idea that was way ahead of its time. Instead of letting Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, and Ronnie DeVoe fade into the background, they proposed something radical. Give them their own group, but not as a traditional R&B act. This new project would be raw, edgy, and unapologetically street. Forget the smooth ballads and polished choreography. BBD would mix R&B with hip-hop, something nobody had dared to do yet. They weren't trying to be New Edition 2.0. They were building something completely different. The goal? Make music that felt like the streets. Music that wasn't afraid to be bold, cocky, or even a little dangerous. This wasn't a spin-off. This was survival. And just when people thought they were done, they dropped Poison. When Poison hit the airwaves, nobody was ready. Radio execs thought the beat was too aggressive. The lyrics? Too raw. The group? Not marketable enough. Even their own label didn't believe in the track. But the streets did. And that was all BBD needed. Poison wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural reset. The second that beat dropped, it was over. New Jack Swing was already bubbling thanks to artists like Guy and Keith Sweat. But BBD brought something different. Something younger, louder, cockier, cooler. They weren't trying to croon you to sleep. They came to make the party jump. And suddenly, three guys who used to stand in the background of New Edition were running the charts. The album went multi-platinum. They dropped 5 back-to-back hits. Their sound was everywhere. From the clubs to high school dance floors. They had the drip, the moves, the attitude, and everybody wanted in. But here's the crazy part. Even as they dominated the charts and packed out arenas, the industry still looked at them like a gimmick, a fluke, a one-album wonder. Why? Because they broke the rules. They didn't fit the mold of an R&B group, and the old heads at the top didn't know what to do with that. So while the world was shouting every word to Poison, the industry was already looking for their replacement. You'd think selling millions of records and dominating the airwaves would earn you some respect in the music industry, right? Wrong. Behind the scenes, BBD was fighting a different battle, one that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with perception. To the public, they were rock stars. But to the suits in the boardrooms, BBD was still treated like New Edition's leftovers, a fun little experiment that just happened to pop. Labels didn't see longevity. They saw a moment, something they could milk fast and toss aside when the next hot trend came along. And it wasn't just about business, it was personal. The group had flipped the R&B game on its head, but because they didn't fit the clean-cut image labels preferred, they were never truly embraced. No Artist of the Year awards, no major brand endorsements, no real push for global expansion, just pressure. The label rushed them back into the studio, hungry for another Poison. But here's the thing, lightning doesn't strike on command. And instead of letting them grow or evolve, the industry tried to copy-paste their success without giving them the tools to actually do it again. It was a setup, and everyone felt it. So now the question was, could BBD prove they weren't just a one-hit wonder? Or were they about to become another name on the industry's long list of what could have been? After Poison exploded, the label didn't waste a second. They wanted another hit. Fast. There was no time to breathe, no time to create, no time to reflect. Just a clock ticking and executives demanding the next big thing. So BBD got pushed into dropping a second album, Hootie Mac. But the energy wasn't the same. The rollout felt rushed. The production wasn't as sharp. And the industry? Already halfway out the door. It still sold, but not like Poison. And just like that, the machine that once backed them with everything went silent. Behind the scenes, things were even messier, because while fans saw cool music videos and coordinated outfits, Ricky Bell was spiraling. He was battling something no chart position could fix: addiction. At first, it was just a way to cope with the pressure, the stress of staying relevant, the fear of being forgotten, the chaos of fame. But it didn't take long before the drugs stopped being a crutch and became a cage. The worst part? Nobody noticed. The industry that once celebrated him didn't step in. No manager sounding the alarm. No label rep checking in. Ricky was suffering in silence, hiding his addiction from everyone around him, including his own bandmates. And the scary thing? He was functioning, performing, touring, smiling for cameras, until he couldn't anymore. By the mid-90s, the sound BBD helped pioneer. New Jack Swing was dying. Hip-hop was getting grittier. R&B was getting smoother. The culture was shifting fast, and suddenly, BBD didn't fit anywhere. They were too edgy to sing love ballads, but not raw enough to compete with rising rap acts. They were stuck in the middle, genreless in a music industry obsessed with labels. And instead of helping them evolve, their label gave up. There was no rebrand, no creative direction, no reinvention plan, just silence. They were told, "You had your moment, that's it." Meanwhile, artists they once shared the stage with were moving on. Bobby Brown was still riding solo success. Boyz II Men were dominating R&B, and new acts like Mary J. Blige and Joe Disi were redefining what soul music sounded like. BBD? They were slowly being erased. Radio stopped playing their new records. Award shows stopped calling. The hype was gone. And just like that, three guys who once defined a movement were struggling to even be heard. But the real tragedy? While the world was moving on, Ricky Bell was barely holding on. His addiction was getting worse. The fame was fading. The money was disappearing. And the industry that once made millions off his voice didn't lift a finger. BBD wasn't just out of style. They were out of time. By the late 90s, Ricky Bell wasn't just struggling, he was drowning. His addiction had taken full control. He was spending thousands of dollars a week just to function, hiding it from his friends, his bandmates, even himself. From the outside, he still looked like a former star. But behind closed doors, he was broke, broken, and barely holding on. Yes, broke. A platinum-selling artist who helped sell millions of records couldn't pay his bills because, like so many artists before him, nobody taught him how to handle the money. And once the hits stopped, the checks did too. It wasn't just his career at risk, it was his life. He was lying to everyone around him, pretending things were fine. But they weren't, and eventually, the people closest to him couldn't ignore it anymore. His wife, Amy, had stood by him through everything. But after one too many close calls, she gave him an ultimatum: get help or I'm gone. That was the moment everything changed. Because when you're at rock bottom, there are only two options: keep falling or finally start climbing. And for Ricky Bell, it was time to fight. He checked into rehab. He confronted the pain he'd buried for years, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a future again. But here's the twist. While Ricky was putting his life back together, nobody expected what BBD would do next. Ricky Bell's decision to get clean didn't just save his life. It started something bigger. While he was in rehab, rebuilding from the inside out, the rest of BBD was at a crossroads. The industry had written them off. No record deals, no radio spins, no tour money. Just memories of who they used to be. But instead of chasing trends or begging for relevance, they did something smarter. They went back to the fans. Forget the labels, forget the industry. They started hitting the road, performing anywhere they could. Small venues, throwback festivals, even clubs. No ego, no frills. Just raw talent and loyalty. And the craziest part? The fans never left. People still knew every word to Poison. Younger audiences were discovering their sound on social media. Their influence on R&B and hip-hop was finally being acknowledged. Slowly but surely, the culture started giving BBD their flowers, even if the industry still hadn't. And while Ricky was healing, something else was happening. He wasn't just staying clean. He was using his voice again, not just to sing, but to speak. He started opening up about addiction, about mental health, about what the music industry does to artists when the cameras are off. He turned his pain into purpose. And BBD? They weren't chasing a comeback. They were building one on their own terms. By the time the 2010s rolled around, BBD wasn't trending, but they were thriving. Why? Because they stopped trying to impress an industry that never respected them and doubled down on the people who always did, the fans. They hit the stage, night after night, city after city. Legacy festivals, old school concerts, even solo shows, whatever it took to stay connected. And every time they performed, the crowd reminded them why they mattered. No label push, no chart pressure, just pure energy and love. Then came the plot twist nobody saw coming. In 2017, Biv DeVoe dropped a new album, 3 Stripes, their first in over 15 years. And guess what? It hit. It debuted at #1 on iTunes R&B. It featured collabs with SWV, Doug E. Fresh, and Boys II Men. It blended that classic New Jack Swing with a fresh, modern sound. It wasn't a nostalgia act, it was proof. They still had it. But that was just the beginning. Because right around the same time, something else happened that changed everything. BET released The New Edition Story, a 3-part biopic that pulled in 29 million viewers and reintroduced the world to the drama, the talent, and the legacy of New Edition, and by extension, Biv DeVoe. Overnight, BBD was back in the spotlight. Interview invites, chart climbs, a new generation discovering who they were. Suddenly, the industry that once ignored them had to act like they'd been fans the whole time. And BBD, they didn't let it go to their heads. They took control of their brand, they owned their story, and they kept touring like they had something to prove, even when they didn't. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were legend status. Decades after they were written off, Biv DeVoe is still out here, selling out shows, inspiring new artists, and proving they never needed industry approval to be icons. They didn't chase clout. They didn't jump on trends. They built a lane and stayed in it. What started as a so-called side project from the Forgotten Guys in New Edition became one of the most influential acts in R&B history. Their blend of hip-hop energy, street style, and smooth vocals birthed a sound that reshaped an entire era. And when the industry turned its back on them, they bet on themselves. Ricky Bell turned his lowest moment into a second chance, and now speaks openly about addiction, mental health, and healing in an industry that still pretends those things don't exist. BBD doesn't need radio play. They don't need awards. They've got something more powerful: legacy. They're living proof that when the industry forgets you, the culture can still remember. So, were they just a product of the New Jack Swing era? Or were they always a little too real for an industry that only knows how to love you when you're trending? Let us know what you think, because the story of Biv DeVoe might not be over just yet.